So line. Line is an important art element. We can see numerous types of line as we look at the art elements. One of the most common, of course, to see is contour line. Here you have an example from Giotto, the Lamentation from his famous Arena Chapel project. And how can we see contour lines here? I basically define contour lines as defining an object. So they are giving the object definition. Giotto was a proto-Renaissance artist. We just talked about Botticelli in the last mini lecture. And again, as I'd mentioned, this is a time of great innovation. So one of the things Giotto was really credited with was making forms that looked realistic. Here we're, think about this idea of people, right? So let's look at the people here that I'm circling. So he made forms that looked realistic. So basically, if you're looking at these shapes of the forms, you'll notice that they have these lines that are quite heavy around the outer edges that help to define and give solidity and mass and weight to the form. Without that line, that heavy line there, that sense of space, of weight, right, would not be fulfilled. So these are what we call contour lines. You can also see it in the landscape if you think about moving up through this rock form, right? You can also see them there. That gives the mass of the rock a realistic feeling, right, in the space. So contour lines, in my opinion, they define an object. They help to create it. Another example I have for you is Matisse. Two examples by Matisse. One a bit more traditionally, I think, representational of a nude female. It's called Odalisque with striped pants. And then a more, we'd say, abstract version. And we'll talk about abstraction a little bit later on. So again, you'll have a sense of what that means as well. But this one, of course, a little bit more abstract. They're both women. They're both variations on nudes, let's say. And they both use contour lines, but you notice in a slightly different way. Here in the Odalisque piece, of course, again, we can use our eyes to see that distinct black contour line, creating the idea of her shape, her mass, her volume, her realism. But again, it functions the same way over here, even though we're dealing with a more abstracted version of the female nude. So hopefully you can see how the contour lines work by looking at these three different pieces. Another type of line you might see is gestural line. And this line does not define a form so much, but it creates, I'd say, energy, motion, right, in a composition. So a really great example, of course, is Van Gogh's Starry Night, where you see these swirls, these masses of lines moving across the picture plane, right, and creating this energy across the piece. They're not so much defining a form, right? They're creating an emotion, a tension in the composition more so than anything else. So these tend to be fluid lines, moving lines, right? Again, gestural lines. And I always explore the question as someone whose specialty is contemporary art. So I spent a lot of time on my own research in the 20th century and beyond, obviously into the 21st century. I always like to look at these theoretical questions. Here you have Kandinsky. He's the first artist to explore non-representation. We'll speak about that as well. And I leave you thinking about, what if a line doesn't have to define a shape? What if it doesn't have to signify energy, motion, something like that? What if a line was allowed to do as it pleased? So the lines, I'd say, in Kandinsky's pieces, they're not defining forms, and they're not really about energy, motion across the piece either. They really exist for their own reasons, as well as the colors here. So again, we get into non-representation, we'll explore this sense of, do these elements have to do their traditional roles, or sometimes are they liberated, right, from those roles? In a Kandinsky, I'd say you definitely have lines that are liberated from their traditional art element roles. So keep the theoretical questions in mind is my point, because within the exploration of art, they're often quite important to consider. And this final example is Mark de Suervo's sculptural piece, Figullo, that was part of a project for the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Whenever you see MoMA, by the way, it's the Museum of Modern Art. So that's what a MoMA is. SF, of course, San Francisco. So one of the things you'll see quite often looking at art pieces are designators of where the project is, right? Who owns a piece of art, right? So again, knowing these designators is an important part of being an appreciator of art. Being able to say to someone, if you see this, oh, that's in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. That's what a MoMA is, right? Impress your friends, right? But this is a piece that they commissioned where you'll notice, again, it's very non-representational. Here we're seeing lines in three-dimensional space. So notice that line is not always a two-dimensional application of an art element. It also can be a three-dimensional application of an art element as well.